guys, Frankie here. Last weekend, my friend and I stayed overnight at a Buddhist temple on Mount Koya in Wakayama Prefecture. The whole mountain is a very sacred place for Buddhism. Kobo Daishi, who studied Buddhism in China and brought Shingon, or esoteric Buddhism, to Japan in the early 800s, founded a temple on Mount Koya to begin his teachings. There's a small town on the mountain, which is the center of it all. There are 117 temples in the small town, and at least 50 of those temples can accommodate overnight guests. The town is very accessible by car or public transit. On public transit, you'd have to take a train to the cable car, then a bus. By car, you'll eventually find yourself on winding mountain roads before reaching the town. It'll be a fun journey either way, and I'll link a resource below about how to get there. Koya-san is also home to Okunoin, Japan's most sacred and largest cemetery. It's centuries old, and you can find tombstones and even trees that are hundreds of years old. People are still currently being honored there, and it's still possible to buy new plots, so you can find many new tombstones as well, mixed in with the older, mossy ones. There are over 200,000 people buried and honored there. These days, burial is not so common, and cremation is the primary thing that people do, but they still have tombstones as a place where family can visit and remember them. My friend and I walked the length of this cemetery a few times and even participated in a night tour, so we'll get more into the history of the cemetery later, so please check the timestamps. In the meantime, let me give you a tour of Ekoin, the temple at which we stayed. I would highly recommend staying in a temple if you're looking for a peaceful retreat in nature. When we entered the room, the window was wide open, overlooking the garden. Instant serotonin. There was also some tea and wagashi, traditional snacks, waiting for us on the table. The room itself was pretty too, with tatami on the floor, sliding doors and windows, and even just the handles on the door were so pretty. Our stay included the room, dinner, and breakfast, and you're also able to participate in meditation and prayer. For 2 people, the total was 30,000 yen for one night, so split between 2 people, that's not bad at all considering meals are included. I can imagine this room being so beautiful in every season, but especially in the fall when the leaves change color, and in the winter when the mountains are covered in snow. Of course, any time of year would be nice, but in summer you have to be careful of bugs. Most of the summer bugs are gone now, but we did have a hornet fly into the room briefly and then it quickly flew back out. This is a whole other topic, but the bugs that come out in summer in Japan are terrifying. There are many temples at which you can stay, but I would highly recommend Ekoin. It's one of the closest places to the cemetery, and it's also the meeting place for the cemetery night tour, which we will go to later. After checking into the temple, we walked around the town a bit. There are temples everywhere, and the town just feels so peaceful. Danjo Garan is the temple complex at the center of Mount Koya, and it's the place where Kobo Daishi did his teachings. There are several temples inside this complex, with the Great Stupa standing at 49 meters tall at the center of it. I don't know if the camera does it justice, but it's so beautiful, and it looked like it had been repainted recently. There's a famous pilgrimage in Japan that's comprised of 88 temples in Shikoku, another island of Japan, and they're all temples where Kobo Daishi spent time or trained. If you're interested in Buddhism in Japan, Koya-san and this 88 temple pilgrimage are definitely things that you must check out. Kobo Daishi, also known as Kukai, is often referred to as the father of Japanese culture. He was a monk, scholar, poet, calligrapher, and teacher, among many other things. He is, of course, the monk who brought Shingon Buddhism to Japan from China, where he studied, and this sect of Buddhism teaches that enlightenment can be achieved during your life through spiritual practice like mantras and meditation, among other things. He's also said to have invented the Japanese writing system of kana. He also founded the first public university in Japan, in Kyoto. He had many construction projects as well, which is why so many temples are attributed to him. Sometime after Kobo Daishi retreated into his mausoleum to begin eternal meditation, Koya-san became the huge religious complex that it is today. After my friend and I walked around town for a bit, we went back to the temple to rest a little and wait for dinner. If you stay at a temple, you can eat shojin ryori, the vegetarian cuisine of the monks. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's vegan actually. The meal was delicious and consisted of so many little dishes. We also had a bowl for rice and a cup for tea. I thought it was great that the meal was included in our stay. After dinner, it was time for the night tour. Our meeting place was right outside of our temple at 7:30 p.m. Anyone can join the night tour whether they stay or not. It just has to be booked beforehand online or through the temple. It costs 2,300 yen per person. They offer the tour in English as well, which I'm very glad we chose because there were only 4 people in the English group, including us. The Japanese tour was split between 2 groups of 15 to 20 people. Our guide was wonderful and explained a lot of history that most Japanese people or history buffs would already know. So a lot of things made perfect sense to us after he explained it. We were also able to ask a lot of questions because there were not so many of us in the group. Surprisingly, even though we were walking through a cemetery in the dark, guided only by the monk's flashlight and the lanterns on the walkway, it was not scary at all. It was incredibly peaceful and spiritual. I did, of course, ask about ghost stories, but the monks said they don't really have any because Koya-san is such a spiritual place. There is one, though. In the past, women were not allowed on Koya-san. That rule didn't change until 1872. Despite this rule, same-sex relationships were still forbidden. There was a couple who planned to run away together. They chose a meeting place and time. However, one man showed up and waited, but the other never came. The one who was kept waiting was so heartbroken that he took his own life, and his spirit still waits there. It's more of a tragic story than a scary one. The monk also explained that Koya-san is basically in a basin surrounded by 8 mountain peaks, so there's very little wind. Those 8 peaks are like the petals of a lotus flower, a symbol of purity and enlightenment, because even though the water may be muddy or dirty, a pure and beautiful flower still arises. The tour ends after the mausoleum, and guests are welcome to continue exploring the cemetery. We walked back with the monk though, and he told us a bit about being a monk. Japanese monks are allowed to get married, so he explained that he lived in a temple when he was single, but now that he's married with children, he lives in a house nearby with them. Japanese monks are also allowed to drink, in moderation of course. After we got back to the temple, we waited a bit for the bath, expecting it to be crowded after the tour, and it was. We did go in at the right time though, because it was empty by the time we got in. I was able to get a quick shot of the bath while no patrons were in there. Obviously, you can't film if anyone else is present because people are going to be naked. It's a shared bath. I also asked the temple before we booked if tattoos were okay, and they assured me that even guests with tattoos are allowed to use the bath. By the time we got out of the bath, it started to get a little bit crowded because staff usually use the bath after the guests are finished. It's also separated by gender, if that was not obvious. It started to rain, and we slept with the window open, with the screen closed of course, and we fell asleep listening to the rain. It was freezing when we woke up though because it practically turned into winter overnight, but it was well worth it, I think. In the morning, there's a prayer service around 6:30 a.m. and a fire ritual after. Then breakfast is served in the room. This was another delicious one. I wasn't able to eat every bite of the dinner, but I did eat everything for breakfast. After breakfast, we checked out, put our bags in the car, and went back to Okunoin. When you walk through the cemetery, eventually you reach a third bridge, and over that bridge you can find a hall of lanterns and the mausoleum of Kobo Daishi. You're not supposed to take any photos or videos once you reach that last bridge because it's a highly sacred area. People, of course, have snuck photos before, but I highly encourage you to respect the wishes of the monks and keep your phone away at this point. Just enjoy the hall of lanterns, light some incense or a candle, and say a prayer to Kobo Daishi. It's a very spiritual experience, whether you practice Buddhism or not. Anyone of any religion can visit, of course. So in the year 835, when Kukai was 62 years old, he entered his mausoleum, and he intended to stay in eternal meditation, praying for the end of suffering for human beings. The emperor in Japan at the time issued a decree to refer to him as Kobo Daishi, meaning, and I quote, "the great master of the propagation of the Buddha Dharma." Nearly 100 years later, in 921, a monk entered the mausoleum and found Kobo Daishi still in his meditating pose, but his hair and beard had grown to great lengths and reached the floor. The monk cut his hair and beard and changed his clothes, then closed the door to the mausoleum once more. Since then, no one else has ever entered. The monks offer meals to Kobo Daishi twice a day, every day, at 6 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., so if you're in the cemetery around that time, you can see them bring his offering. The monk who did the night tour for us explained that they offer intangible things. The food represents freshness, the incense makes for a pleasant scent, and of course prayer and kind words are intangible as well. In the past, before the third bridge was built, visitors had to cross the river to get to the mausoleum, which must have been freezing in the winter. Some monks still enter the water for rituals even in the winter, but it's not mandatory anymore because some monks have had heart attacks due to the freezing cold temperatures. In Okunoin, you may have noticed that there aren't many flowers, and you will mostly find pine branches on the graves. That is because flowers don't last very long, and pine branches will last about a month, or up to 6 months if they're cared for well enough. There are also many gorinto, or 5-element pagodas, which represent, from bottom to top, earth, water, fire, air, and space. The 6th element is consciousness, which of course cannot be seen. There are also many Jizo statues, which are guardians for children and travelers. They're made of stone and typically protect the spirits of children who have passed away. They're often dressed with red hats and bibs because red wards away illness and evil spirits. The monk had also told us about 2 superstitions. There's a well after the second bridge, and if you look into the well and you don't see your reflection, you will die within 3 years. Also, there are many sets of steps in the cemetery. If you trip on the steps, you will also die sometime within the next 3 years. Something else I found interesting was that anyone can be buried, or honored, I guess, in the cemetery regardless of religion, which is one reason why you can find so many torii gates, which are not from Buddhism, but from Shintoism. Even today, you can buy a plot in this cemetery. Although space is getting very limited on the main path, there are many side paths though, and there's a lot of space there. The monks spend a great deal of time cleaning and maintaining graves. Many people have family in Okunoin, but they can't easily make the trip to Koya-san, at least not very often, so they send money to the monks so they can care for the graves. So on this trip, we walked through Okunoin a total of 3 times. We did also want to check out the museum that's in the area, but it was a bit pricier than we expected. The entrance was 1,300 yen, so unfortunately we skipped that and got a quick lunch before heading out. We found a cafe down the road called, I forget the name, so I'm going to insert it, and they had vegetarian and vegan food, which is very easy to find on Koya-san. I wasn't really looking for meat, but it seemed like most places were vegetarian, except maybe the Family Mart. They probably have chicken. So we got a lunch set, and it was way more delicious than I expected, so I highly recommend this cafe. They also had some nice pottery there. That was for sale. This has been a whole lot of talking. Wow. Thank you so much if you've made it through the whole video. I highly recommend visiting Koya-san sometime in your life. I already want to go back, preferably in the winter. My friend and I were saying how nourished we felt after this trip. The food was so good and so healthy, and we walked so much. It was a great learning experience too about the history of Japanese culture and the significance of Mount Koya. So I'll catch you next time, and I hope you have a lovely week. Bye!